I never imagined that helping my husband clean the backyard for my mother-in-law's 50th anniversary party would lead to the biggest shock of my life. My son ran up screaming, "Mom, you need to see this." And when I peeked through the window, I saw my mother-in-law whispering to our neighbor, clutching an envelope marked $50,000 and saying, "Don't worry, no one will ever find out about us." In that moment, my heart sank. I realized the truth, and what I discovered next changed everything, but I knew I had to expose it. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind where the sun pours golden light across the neighborhood, making every leaf shimmer like it has its own secret to tell. I had just stepped outside with my husband, both of us squinting slightly against the glare, ready to tackle the mountain of preparations for my mother-in-law's 50th anniversary party. This wasn't just any party. It was the grand celebration she had always dreamed of, the kind where everything had to be perfect. The decorations, the food, the drinks, the seating, even the way the sun hit the backyard at just the right angle. I could see my husband adjusting the patio chairs, lining them up meticulously as though we were arranging soldiers for some grand parade. I, on the other hand, was more focused on the details that made the difference, wiping the tables until they gleamed, making sure the tablecloths didn't wrinkle, and arranging small vases with fresh roses, their scent mingling in the air with the smell of freshly cut grass. I was already feeling the tension rising in my chest, the familiar cocktail of excitement and dread, because let's face it, my mother-in-law could be demanding. She always had her standards. Her expectations hovered in the air like an invisible weight, unspoken but deeply felt. Even before she arrived, I knew she would inspect every corner, every plate, every tiny glass to ensure nothing was out of place. She was a woman who had perfected the art of appearances, the kind who could make a simple living room look like a scene out of a glossy magazine. My heart raced at the thought of her arriving. Would she notice a single speck of dust, a slightly crooked chair, a misplaced napkin? Meanwhile, my husband, blissfully unaware of my inner turmoil, was humming a tune from one of those old 80s songs we both secretly loved. He adjusted the patio umbrella and then stepped back to admire his work, clearly satisfied, while I bent down to rearrange a set of cutlery that didn't quite line up the way I wanted. I could feel the heat on my face, not from the sun alone, but from the pressure of wanting everything to go perfectly. Guests would begin arriving soon, family members, friends, neighbors, and I knew that in a few hours, this backyard would be filled with laughter, chatter, and the inevitable tensions that come with mixing generations under one roof. The kitchen was a whirlwind of activity. My sister-in-law was chopping vegetables with an intensity one hadn't seen before, and the scent of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread floated through the air, making my stomach growl despite my nervousness. Every sound was amplified in my mind, the clinking of glasses, the rustle of napkins, the gentle thud of chairs being moved. I could hear my mother-in-law on the phone somewhere in the house, her voice cheerful and commanding at the same time, as if orchestrating an invisible army of helpers. She was giving instructions, reminding someone to bring more ice, telling another person to check the table decorations. Even from afar, I could feel her presence, like gravity pulling everything into alignment around her. I stepped back for a moment, wiping my hands on my apron, and took a deep breath. The backyard looked almost magical, bathed in the morning sun, with colorful balloons tied to the fence, sparkling fairy lights dangling from tree branches, and a table in the center laden with flowers, candles, and neatly arranged plates. I could imagine how stunning it would look as the sun dipped lower, painting everything with a warm golden glow. Yet, beneath this beauty, I couldn't shake a small, nagging feeling in my chest, a whisper that something unusual might happen today. But I brushed it aside. How could I have known what was about to unfold? As I moved from table to table, adjusting the napkins one last time, I noticed small details that made me smile. The centerpiece flowers were perfectly aligned, each petal facing outward, the candles unlit but perfectly straight, casting soft shadows that would only enhance the romantic atmosphere when the sun set. I even arranged little name cards for each guest, written in elegant cursive that took me hours to perfect the night before. It felt like a game, a puzzle that needed to be flawless for the main player, the mother-in-law, to step into. By now, the neighbors had started to peek through their fences, curious about the commotion. The smell of food wafted down the street, and I could hear faint greetings as some early guests arrived, bringing little gifts and cheerful smiles. My daughter-in-law was helping set up the drinks table, her energy contrasting my own nervous tension. She laughed as she accidentally spilled a little lemonade, and I found myself laughing too, grateful for the normalcy she brought into the chaos. Even my son, still in pajamas, ran around helping where he could, carrying napkins, fetching small plates, his innocence a stark contrast to the drama that was silently building in the background. I stepped back once more to take it all in. The backyard looked perfect, almost unreal in its beauty. The sun caught the golden strings of fairy lights just right. The chairs were aligned as if placed by a meticulous architect, and the table centerpieces looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. Everything seemed under control. Or at least, that's what I thought. And then as I arranged the last set of utensils, my heart skipped a beat. I noticed something out of place, not a physical object, but a subtle feeling, an odd energy in the air. The way the neighbor's car lingered longer than usual outside, the way my mother-in-law's phone vibrated again and again, the way she had this unusual smile when speaking to someone I couldn't yet see, small knot of suspicion began to form in my stomach. I tried to shake it off, telling myself, it's probably nothing, it's just nerves, just the excitement of the party. Little did I know, that feeling, that tiny spark of unease, was the very first sign of a storm that was about to hit my life. A storm that would shatter the carefully constructed illusion of a perfect family celebration. A storm that would reveal secrets buried deep beneath polite smiles and elegant tablecloths. As I took one last look at the scene, the glowing lights, the neatly trimmed grass, the cheerful chaos of the kitchen, I had no idea that in a few short hours, this backyard would become the stage for a revelation that none of us could have imagined. The party was set, the food was ready, the decorations were perfect, and yet a small, almost invisible tension hung in the air, a quiet hum of anticipation that promised that today, nothing would be ordinary. After spending hours meticulously arranging the backyard, I began to notice subtle, almost imperceptible signs that something was off. At first, I tried to dismiss them, telling myself it was simply the natural chaos of preparing a large family celebration. But as I walked from the kitchen to the patio, adjusting a tablecloth and checking the alignment of the chairs once more, the unease began to grow. My mother-in-law, usually so cheerful and openly enthusiastic during such preparations, seemed different today. Her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes, and there was a tension in her shoulders that I couldn't ignore. It started with small, almost meaningless gestures. When I passed by her, she quickly hid her phone behind her back, pretending to check the oven, but I noticed a flicker of hesitation in her expression. Her movements were precise, deliberate, yet there was a strange, nervous energy radiating from her. It wasn't the usual excitement of a celebration. It was something heavier, almost secretive. Every so often, she would glance toward the neighbor's house, as if expecting someone to arrive or to leave at precisely the right moment. Then came the whispers. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear, just a few clipped words exchanged with a neighbor who had volunteered to help set up the decorations. I wasn't close enough to hear everything, but certain phrases like, "Don't worry," and "No one will find out" reached my ears. My heart skipped a beat. I told myself to calm down, but my mind immediately started racing. Why would my mother-in-law be so secretive during her own anniversary party preparations? Even my husband, who had been humming happily while moving chairs, noticed the tension. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice carrying a subtle edge of concern. I smiled and nodded, brushing off his question, but inside, my senses were heightened. I felt as if I were observing a delicate dance where every movement was choreographed for someone else's eyes only. The way she adjusted her hair repeatedly, the slight pause in her step as she moved past me, the way her eyes darted quickly toward the fence line. Everything seemed like a code, a signal that something was hidden beneath the surface. My daughter-in-law, who had been helping in the kitchen, also seemed to pick up on the tension. She paused while setting out dessert plates and whispered, "Do you think Mom is hiding something?" I shushed her gently, telling her it was probably nothing, but my mind couldn't stop turning over the possibilities. The mother-in-law had always been elegant, poised, and commanding in her presence, but there was now a dissonance, a mismatch between the persona she projected and the subtle cracks I was seeing. Then there was the neighbor. He arrived a little early, supposedly to help set up the tables, but his behavior struck me as odd. He lingered longer than necessary near the edge of the patio, occasionally glancing toward the mother-in-law with a kind of cautious familiarity. His hands were in his pockets, his stance casual, but his eyes were sharp, alert, calculating. The way they exchanged small nods and secretive smiles told me there was more going on than just casual assistance with the decorations. My stomach sank with a mix of suspicion and dread. As I walked past the flower arrangements, I noticed something strange about the vases. One of them, a small crystal vase near the center table, had a tiny envelope tucked behind it, barely visible unless you were looking closely. My mother-in-law's hand brushed it for just a moment as she adjusted the roses, and she quickly pulled it away when she realized I was nearby. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. A secret hiding in plain sight. My pulse quickened. I had always known my mother-in-law to be meticulous, controlling even, but this felt different. It wasn't about perfection. It was about concealment. The tension didn't stop there. While arranging napkins, I overheard fragments of conversation between her and another family friend. "Remember, don't let anyone see this," she said, her voice low but urgent. The friend responded with a nervous laugh, saying something about keeping it safe until later. I froze. What could they be hiding? The words hung in the air like a poisonous fog, slowly seeping into my thoughts. Everything I had assumed about this perfect, polished celebration suddenly seemed fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Even the air seemed different. The usual smell of flowers, fresh grass, and baking bread had an underlying tension now, as if the scents themselves were holding their breath. The breeze, which had earlier felt gentle and pleasant, now seemed to whisper secrets, rustling the leaves in a way that made me shiver. I could see my husband's forehead furrowing slightly, my daughter-in-law biting her lip as she arranged the dessert table, and my son running around, blissfully unaware, completely oblivious to the storm of tension growing just beneath the surface. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my own tasks, adjusting silverware, lining up chairs, arranging food platters, but my eyes kept returning to my mother-in-law. There was something in the way she held herself, a stiffness that hadn't been there before, a careful choreography in her movements. Every time she thought I wasn't looking, her hands would twitch toward the envelope tucked in the flowers or toward the neighbor who lingered at the edge of the yard. It was as if they were both aware that someone was watching, even if the others in the yard weren't paying attention. By the time the first few guests began arriving, the signs had accumulated into a clear, undeniable pattern. Small gestures, furtive glances, whispered phrases, nervous laughter, concealed envelopes. It all pointed to something hidden, something my mother-in-law didn't want anyone to see. My mind raced through questions. Could it be money? A secret relationship? A betrayal of trust? The realization settled in slowly, like a creeping shadow across the vibrant sunlight of the party preparations. Even the way she interacted with my husband and me was different. Normally warm and gracious, she now seemed measured, careful not to give away too much. Her smiles were just a fraction too tight, her compliments slightly delayed, her tone just a shade too formal. The contrast with her usual demeanor was striking, and I couldn't ignore it. I found myself moving closer, pretending to adjust a table, while keeping my eyes on her and the neighbor. Every subtle flick of her gaze toward him made my pulse quicken, my mind spinning with the possibilities. Then came the moment that made me pause completely. My mother-in-law whispered something to the neighbor so softly that no one else could hear, but I caught the words, "No one will ever find out about us." My heart stopped. The backyard, filled with sunlight and laughter moments before, suddenly felt heavy, oppressive, like the air itself had turned thick. The words reverberated in my mind, confirming my fears in a way that nothing else could. There was a secret here, a betrayal hiding in plain sight, and it involved not just my mother-in-law, but someone who had been so casual, so familiar, that no one would have suspected. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and fear. My instincts told me to confront her, to demand answers, but another part of me cautioned patience. I needed to see, to understand, to gather proof before the explosion that was surely coming. Every movement she made, every glance exchanged with the neighbor, was a puzzle piece falling into place. My senses were hyper-aware. I noticed how she adjusted the envelope, how she stepped slightly to the side as if to shield it, how her voice softened when talking to him. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a small indiscretion, a harmless secret. This was calculated, deliberate, and carefully hidden. The signs, subtle as they were, formed a web that threatened to entangle everyone at this party, including myself. The small, almost imperceptible gestures that I had dismissed at first were now undeniable clues of something far deeper, far more shocking than I could have imagined. As I stood there, pretending to straighten a vase, I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. The backyard that had felt so warm and welcoming only moments ago was now a stage for hidden actions, whispered promises, and secrets that could shatter our family forever. And in that moment, I understood that the rest of the day would not be about celebration. It would be about discovery, revelation, and perhaps revenge. The sun was now dipping slightly, casting long, golden shadows across the backyard, and with each passing minute, the tension in the air seemed to thicken, almost like the atmosphere itself knew something significant was about to unfold. I was still arranging the last decorative touches, making sure the fairy lights were evenly spaced, checking that the flower arrangements were symmetrical, and straightening the chairs one final time, when the first car rolled slowly down the driveway. The crunch of tires against gravel made my heart skip a beat. The arrival of family always brought a mix of excitement and nerves, but today, with the strange signs I had already noticed, it felt like the start of something much more intense. The front gate creaked open, and my sister-in-law stepped out of her car, balancing a large tray of hors d'oeuvres. She waved cheerfully, unaware of the subtle storm brewing behind the calm surface of our family gathering. I rushed to greet her, smiling warmly, but my mind was already scanning the backyard for my mother-in-law, searching for any of those small, suspicious gestures that had made me uneasy earlier. She was nowhere in sight at that moment, but I could feel her presence in the air, every carefully orchestrated laugh, every practiced gesture still lingering like a ghost. Soon, my daughter-in-law arrived, holding my youngest niece in her arms. She had spent the last few weeks helping me plan the party, and her energy and excitement were contagious. She set the little girl down on the grass, and my heart softened for a moment as I watched them laugh together. There was a moment of pure joy, a snapshot of family harmony that almost made me forget the gnawing suspicion I felt about my mother-in-law. But even in that moment, I couldn't ignore the undercurrent of unease, the feeling that behind the laughter and smiles, something hidden was waiting to be uncovered. The guests continued to arrive one by one, cousins, aunts, uncles, old friends, and neighbors. Each arrival brought a small burst of energy, adding layers of sound and motion to the already busy scene. The backyard, once a quiet space of preparation, transformed into a bustling hub of greetings, hugs, laughter, and the occasional awkward pause when family members who hadn't seen each other in months or years caught up. And there she was, my mother-in-law, stepping through the back door, elegantly dressed, her posture perfect, every movement precise. She smiled at each guest, shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and laughed at jokes with that carefully measured charm that could make anyone believe she was the perfect hostess. But I noticed the subtle inconsistencies almost immediately. Her eyes would flicker toward the neighbor we suspected earlier, a quick glance that betrayed something beneath the surface. Her hand occasionally brushed against the pocket of her dress, where I knew the envelope was hidden. The way she tilted her head when speaking to certain people, the tiny pauses in her sentences, the deliberate emphasis on innocuous words, all of it screamed hidden intentions. And though she smiled at my husband and me, there was a layer of careful calculation behind it, as if every expression had been rehearsed, every word weighed and measured. The children ran around, their laughter ringing through the air, but even they seemed to sense a subtle tension. My son, usually talkative and carefree, kept glancing toward my mother-in-law as he handed out napkins, his small brows furrowed in curiosity. My niece tugged at her mother's sleeve, asking questions in a soft voice, and my daughter-in-law smiled reassuringly, trying to maintain the joyous atmosphere. It was like everyone was dancing around an invisible force field of tension that only I could feel fully. The neighbor arrived shortly after, his entrance subtle yet deliberate. He carried a small gift, his eyes scanning the crowd before settling briefly on my mother-in-law. There was a faint, almost imperceptible nod exchange between them, a silent acknowledgement of a secret that no one else could perceive. My pulse quickened as I followed their interaction from a distance, pretending to fuss with a tray of appetizers while my mind raced to connect the dots. Everything I had noticed during the preparations, the secret glances, the whispered phrases, the hidden envelope, was aligning into a pattern too precise to ignore. As more family members arrived, the backyard filled with conversations, laughter, and the occasional clinking of glasses. The air smelled of fresh flowers, roasted meats, and delicate pastries, yet beneath the sensory richness, there was a tension that seemed to vibrate just under the surface. I noticed small things that others might have dismissed. The mother-in-law's hand slightly trembling when she handed out drinks, the neighbor's eyes darting to the envelope tucked discreetly behind the floral centerpiece, the occasional hesitation before answering simple questions. Each detail was a clue, a tiny thread of truth hiding behind the veneer of celebration. At one point, I caught her mid-conversation with an elderly cousin, and the smile she wore didn't quite reach her eyes. The way she shifted her weight, subtly angling her body away from the cousin and toward the neighbor, spoke volumes. Even though she was engaging politely with everyone around her, there was an undercurrent of deceit, a careful orchestration of appearance versus reality. It was exhausting to watch, yet impossible to look away. Every movement, every gesture was loaded with meaning, and I felt like a detective piecing together a puzzle that no one else even realized existed. My husband, oblivious to the tension I felt, was busy greeting friends and relatives, laughing and sharing stories, while I silently tracked every detail. The daughter-in-law noticed my attention, and she whispered, "Are you okay? You look tense." I forced a smile, assuring her it was nothing, but inside, my mind was a whirlwind of suspicion, curiosity, and growing dread. Something is happening here, and I am about to witness it, I thought, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. Then came the moment that made my heart stop. The mother-in-law excused herself from the crowd, moving toward the back of the patio, where the neighbor had lingered near the edge of the yard. They spoke in hushed tones, just soft enough that I had to strain to hear. "No one will ever know," she said, her voice almost a whisper. The neighbor nodded, a subtle smile playing on his lips, and for a split second, they exchanged a look that spoke of secrets, betrayal, and carefully hidden truths. I froze in place, pretending to adjust a chair while my mind raced. Every small sign I had noticed during the preparations, the furtive glances, the hidden envelope, the whispered phrases, was now crystal clear. The arrival of the family, the laughter, the celebrations, had been a cover, a distraction from the secret unfolding right in front of me. And as I watched, heart pounding, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Even as the party continued, with relatives chatting and children playing, I felt a sense of quiet determination. I had seen enough to understand that a revelation was imminent, and though I had to wait, to gather more evidence, to ensure the timing was perfect, a part of me couldn't help but feel a rush of anticipation. Today, the mother-in-law's carefully maintained facade would crack. Today, secrets long buried would surface, and the family I knew would never be the same. The backyard, now vibrant with the sounds of conversation and laughter, felt like the calm before a storm. I knew that with the arrival of each family member, the tension, the deceit, and the hidden truths would grow stronger until eventually the truth would have to come out, and there would be no turning back. The party was now in full swing. Guests were mingling, laughter bounced off the walls of the house, and the backyard was alive with movement, children running in circles, couples exchanging stories, and the subtle clinking of glasses filled with champagne. On the surface, everything seemed perfect, as if this golden afternoon was merely a celebration of 50 years of life, love, and family. But beneath the carefully curated smiles and polite conversation, my instincts screamed that something far more sinister was unfolding. I had been noticing small oddities for hours, the furtive glances, the secretive whispers, but now, finally, I stumbled upon the first undeniable clue that would set everything into motion. I had been moving around the dessert table, checking that everything looked flawless. Little cupcakes with delicate frosting sat neatly on porcelain plates, chocolate eclairs glistened under the soft sunlight, and the scent of freshly baked pastries mingled with the aroma of the roses lining the table. I bent down to straighten a small stack of napkins when my eyes caught a flash of white tucked subtly behind the centerpiece of the main table, a small envelope. At first, I thought it was a misplaced note, or perhaps a leftover from the morning preparations, but something about the way it was positioned made my heart skip a beat. It was almost as if it had been intentionally placed there, deliberately hidden in plain sight. I crouched slightly, pretending to adjust a plate, and peered closer. The envelope was thick, rectangular, and sealed with an unassuming yet deliberate neatness. On the corner, faint, almost invisible handwriting spelled out a number, $50,000. My breath caught. I had never seen my mother-in-law handle money in such secrecy during a family gathering. The magnitude of that amount, hidden in the guise of an ordinary party envelope, sent a cold shiver down my spine. My hands trembled slightly as I brushed against the tablecloth, trying to appear casual while my mind raced with questions. I scanned the crowd, careful not to draw attention to myself. My mother-in-law was nearby, adjusting the flower arrangements with her usual poise, and the neighbor who had caught my suspicion earlier was standing subtly at the edge of the patio, his posture relaxed but his eyes flicking constantly toward her. The way they exchanged silent nods and subtle gestures was so deliberate that I could not mistake it as anything innocent. The air seemed to thicken around them, as if everyone else's laughter and chatter had been muffled by a bubble of secrecy. I remember the earlier signs I had noticed, the fleeting glances, the concealed phone, the small tremor in her hand when holding a drink, and now they made sense. This envelope was more than just money. It was proof, a tangible symbol of a secret meticulously hidden from the rest of us. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that the perfectly orchestrated facade of this anniversary celebration was nothing but a mask, a smokescreen for something far darker. I crouched lower, pretending to adjust the silverware, while my eyes stayed fixed on the envelope. The handwriting on it was familiar, yet mysterious, careful, elegant, and deliberate. It was almost mocking in its simplicity, as if daring me to notice it. And in that moment, I knew. This was the first piece of undeniable evidence, the first clue that revealed my mother-in-law was hiding something monumental. My pulse raced, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and the thrilling anticipation of uncovering a long-buried secret. I remembered my son's earlier warning, "Mom, you need to see this." And it now rang in my ears with perfect clarity. He had instinctively known that something was wrong, though he could not articulate it. Children, in their innocence, often sense truths that adults attempt to bury. And now, the proof was right before my eyes. The envelope, tucked behind the flowers, was small, subtle, almost laughably hidden, yet it contained the seed of a revelation that would forever alter our family's perception of my mother-in-law. Every instinct screamed at me to act immediately, to grab the envelope, to confront her and expose the truth, but I knew I had to remain calm. I had to observe, to gather more evidence, to understand the depth of the betrayal before taking any irreversible steps. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, heightening every sense. I noticed the slight shimmer of her bracelet as she adjusted her wrist, the almost imperceptible sigh she released when the neighbor handed her a napkin, the careful way her eyes flicked across the patio as though she were calculating her next move. The first clue was not just the envelope, it was the culmination of every suspicious behavior I had been piecing together. The small, deliberate gestures, the hidden glances, the calculated interactions all pointed to one undeniable truth. My mother-in-law was concealing a secret of monumental importance, and it involved someone within the very fabric of our family gathering. My mind raced with questions. Who else knew? Was my husband aware, or my daughter-in-law? Had this been going on for months, or years? Each possibility made my stomach tighten with anxiety. Then came the subtle interaction that sealed my understanding. The neighbor leaned slightly closer, speaking in a hushed voice. Though the words were too soft for me to hear clearly, the tone carried a mix of urgency and secrecy. My mother-in-law nodded subtly, tucking her hand toward the hidden envelope. The deliberate caution in their body language was unmistakable. They were hiding something that, if revealed, would upend the entire family dynamic. The envelope wasn't just money, it was proof of a betrayal carefully orchestrated behind our backs. I glanced around at the other guests, all blissfully unaware. Children laughed and ran between tables, couples exchanged polite smiles, and distant relatives chatted about work, school, and ordinary family life. No one noticed the silent, explosive secret looming in the middle of the backyard. No one realized that the person they celebrated with such joy was harboring a clandestine betrayal. The contrast between the festive atmosphere and the undercurrent of deception struck me with a dizzying clarity. At that moment, I felt a profound mix of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and a desperate need for justice. The first clue had been revealed, but it was only the beginning. I understood now that the envelope was the tip of the iceberg. It was a tangible symbol of the deceit, the hidden affair that my mother-in-law had maintained for so long. I knew that I had to uncover every detail, every piece of evidence, before confronting her. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on my chest, yet the thrill of discovery was intoxicating. I carefully stepped back, pretending to admire the dessert table, while my eyes never left the mother-in-law and her accomplice. The envelope remained in its hiding place, unassuming yet powerful in its implications. Every flicker of her eyes, every subtle movement of her hands, confirmed that this was no ordinary family celebration. Something monumental was unfolding before me, a secret that threatened to tear the family apart, a betrayal hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. The first clue had been uncovered, and with it, the path to revelation began. I felt a shiver of anticipation, knowing that soon, everything would change. The calm surface of the anniversary party had been shattered, replaced by an undercurrent of deceit, suspense, and unspoken truths. And as I watched from my vantage point, pretending to fuss with the desserts, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The atmosphere in the backyard had shifted subtly, though the majority of the guests remained blissfully unaware. The laughter of children, the polite chatter of relatives, and the soft clinking of glasses still created the illusion of a joyful anniversary celebration. But for me, every second was heavy with tension, every movement weighed with suspicion. I had noticed the first clue, the envelope, tucked almost secretly behind the floral centerpiece, but now, as my mother-in-law whispered discreetly to the neighbor, I realized that I was not the only one noticing. My son, standing a few feet away, eyes wide and voice trembling, suddenly ran toward me, urgency radiating from every step. "Mom, you need to see this!" he shouted, his small hands clutching at my arm, pulling me with a force that left no room for hesitation. I turned toward him, my heart leaping, trying to mask my rising panic. My husband was distracted with a conversation, oblivious to the sudden tension crackling between me and my son. The backyard, filled with decorations, the smell of fresh flowers, and the gentle hum of celebration, seemed to fade around us, focusing all my attention on his frightened, yet determined expression. "What is it?" I whispered, crouching slightly so our heads were closer, trying to protect him from the casual eyes of passing guests. He looked around nervously, as if the truth itself might be overheard, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, "It's Mom, the mother-in-law. She's doing something. Someone's giving her money. She's hiding it." I froze, a wave of disbelief and adrenaline coursing through my veins. My son's words confirmed what I had been piecing together from the subtle signs, the glances, the secretive gestures, and the envelope I had noticed moments ago. This was not just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation, direct and undeniable, from the eyes of a child who had seen the world without the filters of pretense. I tried to calm him, placing a hand gently on his small shoulder, but he pulled me closer, insisting, "Mom, you have to see it yourself." His urgency left no room for doubt. This was serious, more serious than anything I had anticipated. I glanced toward my mother-in-law, who was now further down the patio, adjusting the flowers while the neighbor lingered a few steps behind her. The subtle exchange between them was so precise, so careful, that it screamed secrecy and intent. My son's grip on my arm tightened, and I felt a jolt of fear and determination simultaneously. The innocence in his eyes contrasted sharply with the calculated deceit I had been observing in my mother-in-law's movements. In that moment, I understood the profound weight of what I was about to witness, a betrayal hidden in plain sight, veiled behind the mask of celebration. I followed him quietly, careful not to draw attention, moving between the guests who were now chatting and laughing, completely oblivious to the silent drama unfolding in their midst. My heart raced, every sense heightened, as if the very air around me had thickened with anticipation. The envelope, now unmistakably visible behind the centerpiece, seemed almost aglow with the significance it held. The amount marked on it, $50,000, was not trivial, it was substantial, impossible to ignore, a tangible representation of deceit and betrayal. My son tugged me gently toward a position near the back of the patio, where the mother-in-law and neighbor had retreated from the center of activity. His small voice whispered, "She doesn't want anyone to see she thinks it's safe back here." My pulse quickened as I crouched slightly behind a decorative bush, pretending to admire the garden while keeping my eyes locked on the scene. The neighbor handed her a small note, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met, exchanging a glance so loaded with meaning that I felt my stomach churn. The subtle nods, the careful movements of their hands, and the soft, deliberate whispers confirmed what I had feared for hours. My mother-in-law was hiding something monumental, and someone close was complicit. My son watched beside me, his small hand clutching mine tightly. I felt a surge of protectiveness and awe. How had he noticed what I had not yet fully confirmed? Children often perceive truths adults overlook, and in his innocence, he had seen the tension, the secrecy, and the unnatural behavior that the adults had missed. "Mom," he whispered again, urgency thick in his voice. "She's hiding it, and it's bad, really bad." His words hit me like a thunderclap, every syllable echoing in the quiet spaces of my mind. I took a deep, controlled breath, trying to steady the rush of emotions. Fear, disbelief, anger, and a creeping sense of justice warred within me. The backyard, the beautifully arranged tables, the smiling relatives, all became secondary to the unfolding truth that now demanded my full attention. I knew I had to act carefully. Confrontation without proof could backfire, and I needed clarity before exposing the betrayal to the rest of the family. Yet every instinct screamed that the time to uncover the truth was near. From our hiding spot, I could see my mother-in-law shift her weight, subtly covering the envelope with her hand while the neighbor adjusted his posture, leaning slightly closer in a hushed conversation. I strained to catch fragments of their whispers, but the words were just out of reach. Still, the intent was clear. They were hiding something, deliberately, consciously, and with careful planning. My heart pounded, my pulse quickened, and a cold wave of determination washed over me. This was the first chance I had to witness the truth in action, and my son had given me the warning I needed to focus, to observe, and to prepare for what was coming. I crouched a little lower, pretending to examine the flower bed, all the while keeping my eyes fixed on the mother-in-law and the neighbor. Every movement, every glance, every slight shift in posture told a story, and now I could read it with growing certainty. The envelope, the whispered words, the glances, everything converged into a moment of revelation that was only a heartbeat away. I could feel the electricity in the air, a tension so palpable that it seemed to hum through the grass, the air, and even the smiling, unsuspecting faces of the other guests. I felt my son squeeze my hand again, his small voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, you have to see it. You have to know." His urgency was infectious, heightening every sense I had. I knew then that the warning he gave me was more than instinct. It was a pivotal moment, the first real sign that something catastrophic was about to unfold. It was a turning point in the quiet, meticulously controlled chaos of what had seemed, only moments before, to be a simple, happy anniversary celebration. And as I watched, frozen but fully aware, the first piece of the puzzle fell into place. The subtle signs I had noticed earlier, the hidden glances, the secretive gestures, the carefully placed envelope, were now undeniable. My mother-in-law's betrayal was no longer just a suspicion. It was confirmed, witnessed by the innocent eyes of a child who had courageously intervened at the right moment. The warning my son gave me was the catalyst, the spark that ignited a chain of events that would ultimately expose the truth hidden behind the masks, the laughter, and the perfect decorations. In that instant, the backyard transformed from a celebration into the stage of revelation. Every smile, every laugh, every polite greeting became a contrast to the hidden drama unfolding just steps away. I felt a mix of fear and resolve, knowing that what my son had revealed would lead to the uncovering of a secret so profound it would shake the foundations of our family. And though I could not yet act, I understood one undeniable truth. The warning of my child had set the wheels of discovery into motion, and nothing in this carefully curated celebration would ever be the same again. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting a soft, golden glow over the backyard, and the shadows stretching across the neatly arranged tables seemed to deepen the suspense hanging in the air. Guests were now fully immersed in the celebration, chatting, laughing, and raising glasses to toast 50 years of life and family. The atmosphere appeared festive, normal, even joyous, but beneath the surface I felt the pulse of deception, a rhythm that grew louder with each passing second. Every detail I had noticed earlier, the envelope tucked behind the centerpiece, the secretive glances, the hushed whispers, had been converging into a moment that now felt inevitable, the discovery of the truth that my mother-in-law had worked so hard to conceal. I followed her movements quietly, heart racing, pretending to arrange the flower petals on a side table while keeping my eyes fixed on her every gesture. She was speaking softly to the neighbor, her voice just above a whisper, yet the tension in her posture was palpable. My son, clutching my hand tightly, whispered, "Mom, watch closely," and I did. Every subtle flick of her eyes, every careful adjustment of her dress, every slight pause in her steps screamed that the secret she carried was enormous, deliberate, and carefully hidden from the world around her. Then it happened. The neighbor leaned in closer, speaking in words too soft to hear from across the table, and I caught a fragment that made my blood run cold. "No one must know. The money and the letters are hidden until after tonight." My breath caught in my throat. The envelope, the whispers, the hidden glances, they all made sense now. My mother-in-law wasn't just hiding a small indiscretion or a trivial secret. She was involved in a calculated affair, and the financial aspect revealed by the envelope marked $50,000 confirmed it was a betrayal carefully orchestrated behind our backs. The truth hit me with the force of a storm. Our family, our celebration, our trust, all of it was under siege. My hands trembled as I reached subtly for the edge of the table, pretending to straighten a plate while my mind raced to process the magnitude of the revelation. The mother-in-law, elegant, poised, and seemingly untouchable, was in the midst of an affair with the neighbor. The sophistication with which she hid her tracks, the concealed envelope, the carefully chosen words, the subtle gestures, all painted a portrait of betrayal so precise it was almost chilling. And now, after months, perhaps years, of hidden duplicity, I had discovered the truth. I remember the small details I had noticed earlier, the fleeting glances, the hidden phone, the careful way she brushed against the envelope when moving flowers. Each of those tiny, almost inconsequential actions was now a critical piece of evidence in the puzzle I had pieced together over the course of the party. My son had unwittingly guided me toward this moment, his innocence cutting through the fog of deception that adults often accept without question. I squeezed his hand lightly, a silent acknowledgement of his bravery, while my mind reeled with the implications of what we had uncovered. The backyard seemed to shrink around me as I watched my mother-in-law lean over the table, subtly transferring the envelope into her clutch. Every movement was precise, careful, and deliberate. My pulse thundered in my ears as I realized the audacity of her deception. She had orchestrated this entire celebration as a cover or distraction, while she continued her secret affair right under our noses. The very people she celebrated with, the family who had gathered with love and joy, were oblivious to the betrayal hidden in plain sight. I felt a surge of anger, frustration, and disbelief. How could she, the mother-in-law who had always presented herself as gracious and loving, harbor such a secret? How could she manipulate appearances so perfectly, keeping this hidden from everyone, including my husband, the person who trusted her implicitly? My hands clenched into fists as I imagined confronting her, but I knew that rash action could jeopardize the evidence, the clarity of the truth. I had to be careful. I had to plan. I had to ensure that when the revelation came, it would be undeniable. The neighbor's presence added another layer of complexity. His casual demeanor, the slight smirk he wore when their eyes met, suggested complicity, comfort, and control. Together, they had perfected the art of concealment, orchestrating their interactions so subtly that no one else could perceive the undercurrent of betrayal. And yet, here in the midst of the celebration, with every guest laughing, children running, and relatives oblivious, the secret now lay exposed to my eyes. The weight of that knowledge pressed heavily on me, leaving a mix of dread, anticipation, and a yearning for justice. As I observed, I noticed a small envelope shift subtly in her clutch, almost as if it were aware of the scrutiny it was under. The amount written on it, $50,000, was not just money, it was proof, a tangible symbol of deceit that confirmed the affair was not only emotional but intertwined with financial secrecy. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How many others knew? Would my husband ever forgive such a betrayal? And most importantly, how would I expose the truth without causing irreparable damage to the rest of the family? I remembered my son's earlier words, his urgency, his insistence that I pay attention. He had been right. His innocence had guided me to this moment, revealing the first tangible evidence of the hidden affair. I crouched lower, pretending to admire the flower petals while mentally cataloging every movement, every whisper, every glance. Each subtle interaction became part of a growing dossier of undeniable proof. The discovery of the secret was not a mere revelation. It was a seismic shift in our understanding of my mother-in-law, her actions, and her manipulations. The realization hit me fully. The envelope, the whispers, the careful gestures, and the coordinated movements of my mother-in-law and the neighbor formed a narrative of betrayal too complex to ignore. Every carefully orchestrated smile, every polite word exchanged with the family had been a mask, hiding the affair, the financial deception, and the audacity of the lie. The celebration, meant to honor her life and achievements, had become a stage for concealment and duplicity. And now, the secret lay bare before me. My emotions were a torrent of conflicting feelings, disbelief, anger, fear, and a dark, simmering desire for justice. The backyard, filled with light, laughter, and celebration, suddenly seemed like a stage for confrontation. The discovery of the secret had shifted everything. Every smile and every polite greeting now held a weight of irony. The mother-in-law's carefully maintained facade was cracking, and the reality of her betrayal shone through like a harsh spotlight. I glanced at my son, standing quietly beside me, and felt a surge of pride and protectiveness. His courage, his awareness, had brought me to the truth. Together, we were witnesses to a secret that would change the family forever. And as I watched my mother-in-law continue her interactions, oblivious to the discovery, I felt a mixture of anticipation, dread, and resolve. The secret was out in my mind, if not yet in the open, and the path to revelation, and perhaps revenge, was clear. For the first time, I understood the full depth of her deceit. The hidden affair, the financial subterfuge, the carefully orchestrated gestures, all of it pointed to a level of betrayal that shook the foundation of trust and family loyalty. I knew I had to be patient, to observe further, to wait for the perfect moment to expose the truth. But the discovery of the secret, the envelope, the whispers, the unmistakable gestures, was the turning point. From this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The backyard, once a scene of celebration, now felt like the epicenter of a storm about to break. Every guest, every laugh, every toast seemed tainted with the knowledge I alone possessed. The discovery had been made, the secret was known to me, and a tense anticipation hung in the air, promising a confrontation that would shake the family to its core. And as I took a quiet breath, the first taste of impending justice mixed with the bitter taste of betrayal, I knew that the events of this anniversary party would echo far beyond tonight. The backyard was now fully illuminated with soft, golden string lights, casting warm hues over the meticulously decorated tables, sparkling glasses, and lush floral arrangements. On the surface, the anniversary party continued to exude elegance, laughter, and celebration, but beneath that facade, the air was charged with tension, unspoken suspicion, and an undeniable sense of impending revelation. My mind raced, still focused on the envelope and the hushed conversation I had witnessed between my mother-in-law and the neighbor. The discovery of the secret had sent a wave of adrenaline through me, and now, as I surveyed the crowd, I could see subtle signs that chaos was quietly beginning to ripple beneath the polished veneer of the celebration. I watched as my mother-in-law greeted each guest with her signature poise, every smile meticulously measured, every laugh perfectly timed. Yet, there was an edge in her movements that betrayed a hidden anxiety. The neighbor lingered at the edge of the patio, pretending to be casually engaged in conversation with distant relatives, but I could see the faint tension in his jaw, the quick flick of his eyes toward her, and the deliberate concealment of the envelope. It was as if the air between them crackled with a secret too dangerous to be exposed. And yet, here I was, standing only feet away, fully aware of the truth. The first ripple of shock came unexpectedly. My cousin, who had been chatting with several aunts nearby, suddenly dropped a wine glass with a loud crash. The sound echoed across the patio, drawing several heads in our direction. The mother-in-law's composure faltered for just a split second, her eyes widening in a fleeting moment of panic. I could feel my heart pounding, my pulse quickening. That small interruption, seemingly trivial, had set off a cascade of heightened awareness, sharpening my focus and preparing me for the moments to come. I glanced at my son, who was standing behind me, his small hand clutching mine tightly. His wide eyes reflected both fear and determination. "Mom, she knows we know," he whispered, almost inaudibly. His words were both a warning and an affirmation. The facade was cracking, and the mother-in-law had sensed the subtle shift in awareness around her. The calm, polished exterior she had maintained for hours was starting to fracture under the weight of her own deception. Every gesture, every measured smile, now carried the possibility of exposure. Suddenly, a neighbor's phone buzzed, and in a reflexive movement, he glanced down at the screen. My mother-in-law, noticing the subtle reaction, leaned closer, whispering something urgently. The words were lost to me, but the intensity in their exchange was unmistakable. Every tiny movement, from the flicker of her eyes to the tightening of her hand around the clutch containing the envelope, signaled a tension that was almost physical in its weight. I could feel it pressing down on my shoulders, my chest, and my mind, sharpening every sense and heightening every emotion. Then came the real moment of confusion. My husband, completely unaware of the unfolding secret, approached my mother-in-law to give a toast, his expression bright, his laughter genuine. 50 years! What a milestone! He exclaimed, raising his glass. The mother-in-law's smile was perfect, but I could see a flicker of panic in her eyes, the kind that happens when someone realizes the foundation beneath them is suddenly unstable. The guests around her cheered politely, oblivious to the tension radiating from her subtle movements. Yet for me, and for my son, the situation had become crystal clear. The polished celebration was a thin veneer hiding a web of betrayal and deceit. My daughter-in-law, who had been helping manage the children, noticed my sudden stillness. She leaned in and whispered, "Are you okay? You look tense." I forced a small smile, masking the turmoil boiling beneath the surface. "I'm fine," I whispered back, though every nerve in my body was alert. My eyes never left the mother-in-law and her accomplice. Every subtle gesture, every hidden glance, every momentary shift in posture now seemed magnified, as if the very air around them was charged with secrecy. The first whispers of confusion among the guests began subtly. An aunt murmured to another about the neighbor's sudden arrival. A cousin tilted her head, noticing the mother-in-law's unusual fidgeting with her clutch. These were tiny cracks in the otherwise flawless facade, almost imperceptible to most, but glaring to someone who had already seen the first clue. My pulse raced as I realized how fragile her carefully constructed deception was. One wrong move, one slip, and the entire truth could unravel in front of everyone. A child tripped near the edge of the patio, causing a sudden flurry of movement as adults reached to steady him. In the confusion, my mother-in-law accidentally dropped a small corner of the envelope from her clutch. I caught the subtle flash of white out of the corner of my eye, and my heart leapt. The evidence, the tangible proof of her secret, had almost been exposed, and the very air seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what might happen next. I froze, pretending to adjust a chair, every nerve taut, watching her hastily retrieve the envelope with a grace that belied the panic rising beneath her polished demeanor. I could see the tension in the neighbor's posture as well. His calm exterior was cracking, and the subtle panic in his eyes told me that the secret we had uncovered was weighing heavily on both of them. The backyard, alive with laughter and the light chatter of relatives, now felt like a stage where the drama of deceit was playing out in stark contrast to the ignorance of the guests. Every smile, every polite toast, every gentle handshake now seemed laden with unspoken truth and hidden danger. Then came a moment that made my stomach twist. A cousin, unaware of the secret, made a casual comment about long-standing friendships and loyalty. The words, innocent to most, hit like a hammer in the tension-charged air. My mother-in-law's face froze for a heartbeat, her eyes flicking toward the neighbor, a micro-expression of fear, recognition, and calculation. The illusion of normalcy was collapsing, and the chaos, though still subtle, was now beginning to ripple visibly. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, a mixture of fear, anger, and a growing sense of determination. The shock of the discovery had already hit, but now the confusion was spreading. Every guest, oblivious to the truth, continued their conversations, while I stood silently, heart racing, knowing that the mother-in-law's carefully maintained world was starting to unravel. Her precise orchestration of appearances was failing, and the weight of her hidden betrayal was pressing down, making even her most polished gestures seem forced and fragile. The children's laughter, the polite toasts, the soft clinking of glasses, all of it became background noise to the storm of revelation building in my mind. I glanced at my son, whose wide eyes mirrored my own sense of urgency and fear. "Mom, it's happening," he whispered, and I knew he was right. The moment of exposure was approaching, and every second now felt stretched, elongated, charged with anticipation. Every subtle slip, every accidental glance, every faintly noticeable gesture could trigger a chain reaction that would finally bring the truth to light. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a mixture of dread and excitement. The shock had already begun internally, the realization of the betrayal, the awareness of the deception, but the confusion was spreading outward like ripples across the calm surface of a lake. Guests remained blissfully unaware, yet the tension I felt was almost palpable, thick in the warm evening air. The mother-in-law's perfectly constructed world was no longer fully under her control, and I could see it in the micro-expressions of panic, fear, and forced composure that now colored every movement she made. The first cracks had appeared, and I could sense that the unraveling had only just begun. Every small action, every whispered word, every subtle glance could now lead to exposure. I felt a swirl of emotions, anger, fear, determination, and a thirst for justice, building within me as I silently watched. The shock of the secret's discovery had set the stage, and the confusion that followed created a tension so thick it seemed almost physical. In that moment, I understood fully the celebration, the party, the meticulously arranged anniversary. It was all about to transform into a theater of revelation, confrontation, and upheaval, and nothing would ever be the same again. The evening had settled into a deceptive calm. The golden glow of string lights bathed the backyard in a warm, almost serene hue, and laughter continued to ripple across the gathering, giving the illusion that the anniversary party was unfolding as planned. But beneath that polished surface, my mind raced with the weight of the secret I had uncovered, the envelope, the whispered conversations, and the unmistakable evidence of my mother-in-law's betrayal. I had been careful for hours, observing her every move, watching the neighbor with growing suspicion, and noting each subtle sign of anxiety. Now, however, the moment had arrived. I had to attempt a confrontation, to demand answers, to unearth the truth in front of everyone, and I knew it would not be easy. I approached her slowly, keeping my movements measured, pretending to adjust a centerpiece on a nearby table. My son followed behind me, his small hand clutching mine tightly, a silent reminder of the urgency and gravity of the situation. The envelope, still safely tucked in her clutch, was the focal point of my attention. I had to be careful. Any rash action could alert her and make her retreat further into secrecy, but patience had its limit. The tension coiled around me like a living thing, tightening with every step I took toward the mother-in-law. My pulse thumped in my ears, and I could feel my hands grow clammy, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as every moment became a dance of calculated observation and mounting courage. As I drew closer, I noticed the subtle changes in her posture. Her smile, previously immaculate, now seemed slightly forced, Her eyes darted with calculated precision, searching the crowd as though sensing the invisible line I had drawn between us. The neighbor lingered a few feet away, pretending to admire the decorations, but his eyes flicked constantly between her and me, an unspoken acknowledgement passing silently in their shared code of secrecy. I felt the weight of the moment pressed down, the enormity of what I was about to do settling like a stone in my stomach. This was more than a confrontation. It was the first step toward unmasking a betrayal that had been carefully hidden for years. I cleared my throat softly, taking a slow, steadying breath before speaking. "Mother-in-law," my voice carried across the small gap between us, enough to catch her attention without alarming the nearby guests. She turned toward me, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the panic I had been anticipating. "Yes," she replied, her tone light, almost casual, but it carried a subtle tension beneath the polished veneer. Her hand instinctively brushed against the clutch holding the envelope, and my eyes narrowed, confirming that the evidence was within reach, yet still deliberately concealed. I stepped closer, lowering my voice slightly, ensuring that my words would reach only her, my son, and perhaps the neighbor if he dared listen. "I know what you've been hiding," I whispered, the weight of the words heavy with accusation and disbelief. The subtle quiver in my mother-in-law's hands betrayed her composed facade. She took a step back, but not enough to hide her reaction. I could see the tension ripple through her posture, the way her shoulders stiffened, and the faint tremor in her lips as she swallowed the carefully rehearsed lies she had held for so long. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the neighbor, who gave a subtle shake of his head, almost imperceptible, yet conveying a shared understanding. The truth had been discovered. My pulse quickened as I realized that this attempt at confrontation was more delicate than I had imagined. One wrong word, one sudden motion, could cause her to retreat entirely, and the carefully gathered evidence, the envelope, the whispers, the gestures, could vanish in an instant. My son tugged at my sleeve gently, his eyes wide, silently urging me to proceed but also to be cautious. I took another deep breath, steadying my voice. "Mother-in-law, the envelope, the money, the letters. I saw it all." My words hung in the air, sharp and accusing, piercing the carefully constructed bubble of celebration. I saw her lips pressed together, her eyes widening slightly, a flicker of panic mingled with anger passing across her face. The neighbor, now aware that the confrontation had escalated, subtly shifted his stance, as if ready to intervene but unsure how. Every second stretched, the tension so thick it seemed almost tangible, pressing down on every person nearby, even those oblivious to the unfolding drama. She opened her mouth, attempting to deflect, to maintain control, to salvage the polished image she had cultivated for hours. I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice wavering slightly, betraying the truth behind her forced composure. The tremor in her tone, the hesitation in her words, the micro-expressions flashing across her face, they confirmed everything I had feared. My heart pounded with a mixture of anger, vindication, and disbelief. The betrayal was real, deliberate, and now undeniably exposed to my gaze. The backyard, once a scene of joyous celebration, now seemed charged with unspoken tension. Guests laughed, oblivious to the drama, but I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, subtle and electric, as the mother-in-law grappled with the first undeniable confrontation in front of me and unknowingly in front of my son. Every gesture she made, from adjusting her dress to shifting her stance, carried the weight of guilt and fear. The neighbor's casual stance no longer held. He was acutely aware that the secret was being threatened, and I could sense a ripple of panic in his calculated demeanor. I stepped even closer, lowering my voice so that it was intimate yet resolute. "It's not just the money, it's the betrayal, the affair, all the lies," I said, my tone steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. The mother-in-law's eyes flickered toward the guests for a fraction of a second, then back to me, the conflict in her expression palpable. She was caught between maintaining the illusion of innocence and confronting the undeniable truth that I had exposed. Every carefully crafted lie she had built over the years now teetered on the edge of collapse. I could feel my son's small hand tighten around mine, a reminder of why I had to see this through. The attempted confrontation, while not yet fully explosive, had pierced the veil of secrecy. Her composure, once impeccable, now showed cracks, small, almost imperceptible to others, but glaringly obvious to me. The envelope, the whispers, the subtle gestures, they were all now part of a web that could no longer hold. The betrayal, the deceit, and the hidden affair were exposed to my gaze, and nothing would ever be the same again. She opened her mouth again, attempting to justify, to deflect, to regain control, but the words faltered, choked by the undeniable weight of a truth. I felt a surge of vindication, a quiet but powerful sense of justice beginning to stir inside me. Yet, I also felt the sting of anger, betrayal, and confusion, the realization that the celebration, the joyous anniversary, had been orchestrated around deception. The backyard was no longer merely a place of festivity, it had become a battlefield of truth, deception, and impending reckoning. And in that moment, I realized that while the confrontation had begun, the full extent of the revelation was still to come. The mother-in-law's carefully maintained world was cracking, the neighbor's complicity was evident, and the secret that had been hidden for so long was now teetering on the edge of exposure. Every heartbeat, every subtle gesture, every whispered word carried the weight of impending discovery. The attempted confrontation had ignited the spark, but the fire of truth and justice had only just begun to burn. The backyard had quieted for just a brief moment, as if holding its breath, the soft chatter of guests dimming slightly as the weight of the evening's tension began to press in on me. The string lights cast long, golden shadows across the patio, highlighting the perfectly arranged tables, delicate floral arrangements, and sparkling glasses, but none of it could mask the storm raging within me. In that tense silence, my mind began to drift, traveling backward through the years, tracing the threads of my mother-in-law's life, our family history, and the moments that had led to this shocking night. I could see her smiling at my husband as a young woman, her hands deftly preparing family meals, always careful to maintain an image of grace, generosity, and trustworthiness. Those memories were now tangled with doubt, betrayal, and the haunting realization that beneath the poised exterior lay secrets that had festered for years. I remembered my wedding day vividly. She had been so radiant, so warm, welcoming me into the family with open arms, offering advice and guidance as if she were a guardian angel. Her laughter had seemed genuine, her hugs comforting. And yet, even then, I now wondered, were there subtle signs I had missed? The way she lingered near certain guests, the glances exchanged with the neighbor I had long regarded as harmless, tiny details that had seemed insignificant at the time, but in retrospect, were pieces of a puzzle I was only now able to see clearly. The contrast between the mother-in-law I remembered and the woman orchestrating secret affairs, hiding envelopes with thousands of dollars, was stark, almost surreal. It was as if two different lives had coexisted in parallel, only now colliding in this moment of revelation. The funeral of my father-in-law came to mind next. I recalled her composure as she stood before the gathered mourners, offering comforting words, ensuring that the family appeared united and dignified in our grief. At the time, I had admired her strength, her ability to keep the family together even in sorrow. But now, as I reflected on those moments, I realized how adept she had been at controlling perception, manipulating emotions, and carefully curating every interaction. Every gesture, every word, every smile had been crafted, polished, and hidden behind a mask, just as she had done tonight. The thought filled me with a deep, almost suffocating sense of betrayal. How many other moments, I wondered, had been carefully staged, every emotion, every action, a piece of her secret life kept from the rest of us. I glanced at my son, standing close by, his eyes wide and alert, absorbing every movement, every expression. His innocence and honesty contrasted sharply with the calculated deception I had witnessed. I thought about all the family gatherings, holidays, and celebrations we had shared over the years, the birthdays, the anniversaries, the quiet Sunday lunches, and I began to question how much of it had been real and how much had been performance. Each recollection of past events now carried a shadow of doubt, each memory tinged with the bitter realization that our family had been operating under a carefully maintained illusion. The wedding anniversary we were celebrating tonight had brought the hidden layers of deceit into sharp focus. I remembered the invitations sent months ago, the planning, the careful coordination of the guest list, the decorations, and the celebratory meals. She had been meticulous, ensuring everything was perfect, maintaining her reputation as a devoted mother-in-law and family matriarch. And yet, as I watched her tonight, the envelope in her clutch, the subtle exchanges with the neighbor, it became clear that all those efforts had served a dual purpose. Beneath the surface of festivity lay secrets, betrayal, and the ongoing concealment of a life hidden from those she supposedly loved. I recalled small, seemingly insignificant moments from years past, late-night phone calls, whispered conversations when others were present, moments when her eyes seemed to linger too long on certain people or objects. They had seemed trivial, or perhaps I had chosen to ignore them to maintain peace. But now, in the harsh light of discovery, those tiny details took on new meaning, revealing a pattern of secrecy and deception. My mother-in-law's ability to manipulate perception, to maintain control over how she was seen, had been honed over decades. Every smile, every hug, every kind word had been carefully calculated to maintain an image while hiding the truth. I remembered arguments my husband and I had had in the past, moments when I had questioned his mother's intentions or her subtle influence on family decisions. I recalled my feelings of discomfort, the nagging suspicion that something wasn't right, feelings I had tried to dismiss as overthinking. But now, with the discovery of the envelope, the whispered words, the secretive gestures, those past moments aligned with the present revelation. It was as if a veil had been lifted, exposing a pattern of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal that had persisted for years, carefully hidden behind the facade of a loving, supportive mother-in-law. The tension in the backyard seemed to mirror the turbulence of my thoughts. Guests continued to chatter, laugh, and clink glasses, unaware that history and deception were colliding in front of me. The golden light, the laughter, the warmth of a celebration, all of it felt like a mask, a fragile veneer covering the intricate web of secrets I was now untangling. Each memory of past family gatherings, weddings, funerals, and holidays became colored with a new understanding. My mother-in-law had meticulously hidden her duplicity, using charm, grace, and calculated interactions to shield her betrayal from those who trusted her most. As I reflected on the past, I realized the full scope of the situation. The betrayal was not confined to a single moment, a single decision, or even tonight's anniversary party. It had been cultivated over years, hidden behind the polite smiles, measured gestures, and carefully chosen words. The envelope, the money, the whispered promises, they were merely the surface of a deeper, more pervasive deceit that spanned decades. Every seemingly innocent interaction now held a shadow, every memory a hidden meaning, and every family gathering a potential stage for concealment. My emotions surged: anger, betrayal, disbelief, and a growing sense of resolve. I understood why my son's warning had been so urgent, why my instincts had tightened around the sense of unease I had felt all evening. The past had been quietly guiding me to this revelation, each moment, each memory, preparing me to recognize and confront the truth. The years of hidden deception, carefully veiled behind kindness and maternal affection, now seemed like a lifetime of lies converging in this single, explosive moment of realization. I looked at my mother-in-law, standing elegantly amidst the celebrations, clutching the envelope as if it were an extension of herself. Every flash of memory, the weddings, the funerals, the holidays, the whispered secrets, coalesced into a stark, undeniable picture of betrayal. The woman I had known, the matriarch, the loving mother-in-law, was now revealed as a master of deception, her carefully curated past now laid bare in my mind. Each memory, once comforting, now carried the sting of betrayal, the weight of secrecy, and the sharp clarity of truth. And in that moment, as the past and present collided in my mind, I realized the enormity of what lay ahead. The confrontation, the exposure, the reckoning, it was all inevitable. The threads of the past had led directly to this point, and nothing would ever allow the illusion of family harmony to remain intact. The shock, confusion, and emotional turbulence of the evening were only the beginning. My mother-in-law's secrets, hidden for decades, had finally been illuminated, and the full consequences of her actions were now poised to unfold. The evening had quieted, though not entirely, as the celebration carried on around us, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. The golden glow of string lights bathed the backyard in warm hues, casting shadows that danced across the meticulously arranged tables and the delicate floral centerpieces. My mind, however, was far from the celebrations, locked entirely on the revelation of my mother-in-law's betrayal, the envelope, the whispers, and the unmistakable proof that she had hidden an affair behind the veil of family gatherings and anniversaries. The shock of the discovery had given way to a simmering sense of resolve. Anger, disappointment, and a need for justice pulsed through me like electricity, and for the first time that night, I began to formulate a plan not born of rash emotion, but of careful, calculated strategy. I retreated slightly to the edge of the patio, pretending to check the placement of napkins on a side table, all the while observing my mother-in-law. She laughed at a joke from a distant cousin, her smile bright, yet her eyes flicked nervously toward the neighbor. Every gesture, every subtle glance reinforced the urgency of what I needed to do. I realized that exposing her rashly could backfire, causing her to retreat further into secrecy and potentially destroy the evidence we had already seen. No, this had to be deliberate, precise, a revenge that matched the scale of her betrayal. I needed a strategy that would ensure the truth could no longer be denied, no matter how cleverly she tried to hide it. I crouched slightly, my son's small hand slipping into mine. His innocence and trust anchored me, and I reminded myself why I had to see this through. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair, it was about the violation of trust, the manipulation of family, and the deceit carefully orchestrated over years. The envelope containing $50,000 wasn't just money, it was proof, a tangible marker of the secret she had hidden from all of us. The whispers I had overheard, the careful gestures, the nervous glances, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and now it was my turn to complete it. Planning revenge meant uncovering every hidden detail, anticipating every potential move, and ensuring the full extent of the betrayal would be revealed in a way that could no longer be ignored. I began mentally cataloging every interaction of the evening. The mother-in-law had made subtle errors, tiny slips that had almost gone unnoticed to anyone else. The neighbor's casual stance, his flickering eyes, the envelope's almost imperceptible movements. It was a map of secrecy, and I could trace each path toward exposure. I remembered every detail from previous gatherings, the unexplained phone calls during weddings, the whispered exchanges at funerals, the subtle manipulations of family members to maintain appearances. Each memory, each observation, was now fuel for the plan I was crafting. Revenge, in this context, would not be impulsive, it would be methodical, surgical, and undeniable. I glanced around, noting the placement of guests. The family was oblivious, laughing and celebrating, unaware that the foundation of the evening, of trust and family honor, was built atop a layer of lies. I realized that the revenge had to be staged in such a way that it would reveal everything to the people who mattered most, in a context that left no room for denial. My mother-in-law had controlled the narrative for years, carefully curating each moment to ensure no suspicion would arise. Tonight, however, I had the upper hand, the knowledge, the proof, and the clarity of truth. The plan would be simple in execution, but devastating in effect. Expose the betrayal fully, ensure the evidence was undeniable, and allow the family to witness the depth of the deception firsthand. I pictured the sequence in my mind. A moment where she would be compelled to reveal the envelope, a careful positioning of witnesses, perhaps even a strategically placed conversation to ensure the truth could no longer be ignored. Each step required precision. The wrong move could alert her, cause her to hide the evidence, or manipulate the story to her advantage. But every careful observation I had made over the years now converged into an advantage I could exploit. I understood her patterns, her habits, and the ways she manipulated perception. My plan for revenge would turn her own tactics against her, using her calculated actions as the mechanism of exposure. My thoughts shifted to the financial element, the $50,000 hidden in the envelope. It wasn't just money, it was leverage, a symbol of deceit, and a tangible confirmation of the affair. The plan would involve exposing not only the emotional betrayal, but also the financial manipulation, demonstrating the full scope of the deceit. I knew that confronting her in private would not suffice. The exposure needed to be public, undeniable, and tied directly to the actions she had meticulously hidden from the family. My goal was justice, clarity, and reestablishment of trust among those who had been misled, and revenge would be the vehicle that delivered it. I thought back to every subtle clue I had noticed over the years, the whispered tones, the hidden notes, the secretive glances. Each had seemed insignificant at the time, but now they were threads in a tapestry of deception. My revenge plan was to weave these threads into a single, undeniable revelation. I would orchestrate the moment with careful timing, using her own patterns against her, and ensuring that every member of the family understood the full extent of her betrayal. This was not about humiliation alone. It was about exposing the truth in a way that could no longer be twisted or denied. As I mentally rehearsed each step, I considered the emotional impact. My son's presence, my husband's oblivion, the reactions of the family, they all had to be anticipated. Revenge was not merely a response to betrayal. It was an art of timing, precision, and understanding the psychology of those involved. I needed to predict how she would react, how the neighbor would intervene, and how the family would process the unfolding truth. Every possible outcome had to be considered, every variable anticipated. The plan would be foolproof, leaving no room for manipulation, no avenue for denial, and no escape from the consequences of her actions. The anger that had surged upon discovering the secret had transformed into a cold, focused resolve. Revenge was no longer a mere fantasy. It was a carefully constructed strategy, a sequence of calculated moves designed to unearth every hidden action, every concealed lie, every carefully guarded secret. I would ensure that the betrayal, hidden for years behind smiles, gestures, and celebrations, would finally be illuminated. The envelope, the whispers, the gestures, all of it would become part of a revelation so complete, so undeniable, that the truth could no longer be ignored. I imagined the moment of execution vividly, my mother-in-law confronted with the undeniable evidence, the family witnessing the betrayal unfold, the neighbor exposed, and the full scope of the secret revealed. Every detail, every subtle clue I had collected over the years, every flicker of deception would be laid bare. Revenge would not be about vengeance alone. It would be justice, clarity, and reestablishing trust in a family that had been manipulated for far too long. As the party continued around me, oblivious to the storm brewing at its center, I felt a surge of determination. The plan was set, the strategy clear, and the timing precise. My mother-in-law's carefully maintained facade was about to crumble, and the secret she had hidden for so long would finally see the light of day. Every moment, every step, every observation would be leveraged to expose the betrayal fully, to deliver justice, and to reclaim the truth for the family she had deceived. The revenge was ready, and the countdown to revelation had begun. The anniversary party had reached its peak, glasses clinked, laughter echoed across the backyard, and soft music floated in the warm evening air. At first glance, the scene seemed idyllic, a picture-perfect celebration of 50 years of life, love, and family. Yet beneath the polished surface, every detail was charged with tension, every movement weighted with unspoken truths. I stood at the edge of the patio, my hands gripping a glass I hadn't touched, my eyes fixed on my mother-in-law and the neighbor. The envelope, the whispers, the furtive glances, they had transformed the air into a minefield of anticipation. Each moment held the potential to ignite a confrontation, to expose the betrayal that had been hidden for so long. The first ripple of tension came when my mother-in-law laughed at a joke that wasn't funny, a forced sound that barely disguised the panic flickering across her face. Her eyes darted toward the neighbor, who, in turn, adjusted his stance, pretending casual ease while his hand brushed against the envelope tucked securely in her clutch. I felt my pulse quicken. The very air seemed thick with suspense, almost tangible, as if every guest, oblivious to the hidden drama, were actors unknowingly performing on a stage set by deception. My son, standing close, whispered, "Mom, she's acting weird again," his voice barely audible over the music. I nodded subtly, signaling him to stay close, while inwardly preparing for the moment I had been planning, the confrontation that would finally bring everything into the light. The children ran around the yard, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension I felt coiling in my chest. A cousin spilled wine on the edge of a tablecloth, causing a minor flurry as nearby guests rushed to help, and for a split second, my mother-in-law's composure faltered. Her hand, which had been delicately resting on the clutch, twitched ever so slightly, betraying her internal panic. Every small motion now carried monumental significance. Each gesture, each fleeting glance, was a signpost pointing toward the truth I had uncovered. The meticulous planning of the evening, intended to celebrate her milestone, now became the backdrop for the unraveling of her carefully constructed facade. As the evening progressed, I noticed subtler signs of tension in other family members. My husband, still blissfully unaware of the secret, occasionally shot glances at his mother, picking up on the slight cracks in her polished exterior. His confusion, mild and fleeting, only intensified the dramatic irony, as I knew the truth that he did not. The neighbor remained poised, but his calculated calm began to show cracks, the way he shifted his weight, the brief, almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders, and the avoidance of direct eye contact with anyone but my mother-in-law, all indicated an awareness of the impending exposure. Every small movement, every subtle misstep, became a vital detail in the unfolding drama. Then came the moment that made my stomach churn. A distant relative, unaware of the undercurrents, asked loudly about the surprise gift for the anniversary, pointing vaguely toward the table where the envelope had been momentarily left. My mother-in-law's eyes widened imperceptibly, her mouth forming a tight line before she forced a polite smile. The neighbor's hand twitched subtly as if to cover the envelope, and I realized the fragile balance of secrecy was teetering dangerously. My heart raced as I silently calculated the timing, the sequence, the precise moment to act, knowing that one wrong move could allow her to hide the evidence or spin the narrative in her favor. The music shifted, and a dance was announced. Couples began moving toward the center of the patio, and the mother-in-law followed the flow, keeping the envelope close to her body, her movements deliberate and controlled. I could see the beads of sweat forming at her temples despite the warm evening breeze, a clear sign of her growing anxiety. Guests continued to smile, chat, and dance, unaware that beneath the surface of celebration, the tension between truth and deception was reaching a critical point. Each step she took seemed measured, every laugh a fraction too high, every glance a subtle plea for invisibility. I caught a brief, sharp glance exchanged between her and the neighbor, a silent code that betrayed their shared panic. My son, standing next to me, tugged gently at my sleeve and whispered, "Mom, now." His words, innocent yet charged with urgency, reminded me that the moment for action was drawing near. I felt the adrenaline surge, a mixture of anger, anticipation, and resolve. The confrontation was imminent, and the tension in the air was almost suffocating. Every subtle motion of the mother-in-law, every hesitation in her steps, every calculated smile now became part of the intricate web that would soon unravel. The adults around her remained blissfully unaware, chatting politely about past vacations, family events, and mutual friends. Yet, I noticed the slight stiffening in her posture as a cousin approached with a curious question about the neighbor. Her smile froze for a moment, her hand tightened around the clutch, and I felt the wave of tension hit me like a physical force. The carefully maintained calm of the party was fracturing, cracks appearing in the illusion she had so carefully constructed. I could almost hear the silent heartbeat of impending revelation, thudding louder in my chest than any music or laughter around us. Then came another subtle incident, a glass of champagne tipped precariously near the edge of the table. My mother-in-law's hand shot out instinctively to steady it, revealing a flash of the envelope beneath her clutch. My pulse leapt. It was the evidence, even closer to exposure than before. The neighbor's eyes flicked toward it, a flash of fear crossing his carefully composed face. The stakes had escalated, and every second became a potential trigger for confrontation. I realized that the party, once a symbol of joy and celebration, had transformed into a pressure cooker of revelation, deception, and suppressed tension. I observed my husband, blissfully unaware as he laughed at a joke, his hand resting casually on the table. The contrast between his ignorance and my awareness intensified the sense of impending justice. Every small movement of my mother-in-law, the tilt of her head, the shift of her feet, the tightening of her grip on the clutch, signaled that the walls of secrecy were closing in. I felt the urgency rise within me, a cocktail of fear, anticipation, and righteous indignation. The moment of exposure was approaching, and the careful orchestration of the evening meant that the consequences of revelation would be felt by all, visible in their reactions, undeniable and irreversible. Then, as a group of younger cousins gathered near the center of the patio to take a photograph, my mother-in-law's composure cracked momentarily. She laughed too loudly, shifted her weight nervously, and brushed the envelope against her body, inadvertently signaling to me the exact position it was in. My mind raced, planning the sequence, the timing, the approach that would ensure the exposure could not be avoided. Every subtle gesture had become a piece of the puzzle, every flicker of her eyes a clue to exploit, every whispered hesitation a potential opening for revelation. The night continued, each moment thick with unspoken tension. The laughter, the music, the clinking glasses, they became background to the silent drama unfolding before my eyes. The mother-in-law's every action, every carefully constructed smile, every tiny movement was laden with the weight of guilt and fear. I realized that the party itself, meant to celebrate her life, had become the stage for the unfolding of truth and the imminent exposure of her betrayal. The tension was so thick that it felt almost physical, pressing down on everyone nearby, though most remained blissfully unaware. And in that charged atmosphere, I understood fully, the revelation was near. Every subtle slip, every tremor of composure, every hidden glance was setting the stage for the confrontation that would finally unmask the betrayal. The envelope, the neighbor, the mother-in-law's carefully maintained facade, all were poised on the brink of exposure. The tension at the party was no longer just a background element, it had become a living, breathing force, holding every participant in suspense, making the air electric with the anticipation of truth finally coming to light. The air in the backyard had shifted completely. The soft glow of the string lights now seemed harsh and accusatory, casting long, wavering shadows across the meticulously decorated tables and chairs. The music, once a pleasant background, now felt intrusive, echoing unnaturally against the tension thickening the atmosphere. Guests continued to laugh and chat, oblivious to the storm about to erupt in their midst, while I felt every heartbeat like a drum signaling the moment I had been preparing for all evening. My hands, slightly trembling despite my resolve, gripped the edge of a table, my eyes fixed on my mother-in-law as she moved delicately through the crowd, clutching the envelope that had become the symbol of her betrayal. I had rehearsed this confrontation in my mind dozens of times, each scenario meticulously crafted, yet nothing could fully prepare me for the adrenaline, the anger, the fear, and the righteous indignation that surged through me in waves. Every step I took toward her was deliberate, calculated, slow enough to maintain control, yet direct enough to ensure there was no escape from what was about to unfold. My son, quietly standing by my side, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. His small hand slipped into mine, a grounding presence amidst the chaos building in my chest. I glanced around, noting the positioning of family members, the ones who mattered most in this confrontation, and ensured that witnesses were strategically placed to observe every motion, every word, every undeniable proof of the deceit we had discovered. I finally approached her, my gaze locked with hers. Her smile faltered for the first time since the evening began, and a flash of panic crossed her face, brief, almost imperceptible but glaring to me. "Mother-in-law," I said firmly, my voice carrying across the slight distance between us, cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. The laughter around us seemed to falter for a heartbeat, though the guests did not yet grasp the gravity of what was to come. She turned toward me, her eyes widening slightly, and I could see her assessing, calculating, as if trying to determine whether this confrontation could be evaded. I took a slow step closer, allowing the tension to escalate naturally, and whispered with quiet intensity, "I know everything. The envelope, the money, the secrets you've been hiding, the affair." My words were deliberate, precise, and laden with accusation, yet restrained enough to allow the full weight of revelation to settle slowly in the space between us. Her hand twitched involuntarily against her clutch, and the neighbor, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, the tension in his body unmistakable. Every subtle motion, every minor reaction, was a signal that the truth was breaking through the carefully constructed walls of secrecy she had maintained for decades. Guests began to notice the shift in atmosphere. A few curious glances flicked toward us, but the majority remained oblivious, enjoying the party. Still, the energy of confrontation was palpable, thickening the air with anticipation. I could see my mother-in-law struggling to maintain her composure. Her lips pressed together tightly, her eyes darting toward the neighbor, and then briefly toward my husband, who still had no idea of the truth lurking beneath the surface of celebration. The betrayal that had been hidden so meticulously was now on the verge of exposure, and there was no longer any possibility of retreat. I took another step closer, my voice low but firm, carrying both authority and controlled anger. All these years, all the weddings, the funerals, the family gatherings, you manipulated everything. You lied to everyone you claimed to love. The words cut through the air, silent in their power, leaving a shadow of shock in their wake. I could see the beads of sweat forming at her temples, the subtle tremor in her hands, the almost imperceptible quiver in her voice as she attempted to respond. I don't know what you mean, she said, but the words were hollow, lacking conviction, betraying the panic she felt inside. I gestured subtly toward the clutch. The envelope, the $50,000, the secret meetings with him, it's all here. Everyone is about to see what you've been hiding. The neighbor shifted again, clearly aware that the moment of exposure was imminent. The tension between them, the silent complicity that had sustained this deceit, was now unraveling in plain sight. Guests, sensing the subtle change, began to murmur quietly among themselves, though still unaware of the full scope of what was about to occur. Then came the hardest part, watching the mother-in-law's composed facade crack. Her eyes, wide and panicked, darted toward the guests, as if seeking some escape or silent plea for intervention. The weight of the truth pressed down on her like a physical force, and I realized that this confrontation was not merely about accusation. It was about justice, clarity, and the undeniable exposure of a life built on secrecy and betrayal. "You can't hide it anymore," I said, my voice steady, calm, yet charged with emotion. "The family deserves the truth, and tonight it will finally be seen." Every detail mattered. The positioning of the envelope, the careful orchestration of witnesses, the timing of my words, all had to align perfectly. A sudden motion, a flick of the wrist, a glance toward the wrong person could have allowed her to spin the story, to obscure the truth once again. But I had planned meticulously, anticipating every possible reaction, ensuring that the exposure would be complete, undeniable and permanent. The tension in the backyard became almost tangible, a living entity pressing on everyone present. I could see the cracks forming in her expression. Her breathing had quickened, her hands fidgeted with the clutch, and her eyes darted helplessly around the crowd. The neighbor, sensing the imminent collapse, attempted to subtly step between her and me, but it was too late. The confrontation had begun, and the momentum of revelation could no longer be stopped. My son squeezed my hand, a quiet anchor amidst the storm, and I knew that the moment of truth had arrived. I raised my voice slightly, ensuring it would be heard by the key family members without alerting the entire party just yet. All the lies, the manipulations, the betrayals, they end tonight. The truth is coming out, whether you like it or not. Her eyes widened, the tremor in her lips more pronounced, as she realized the full magnitude of the exposure she could no longer prevent. The neighbor, frozen, knew his complicity was about to be laid bare. Every subtle deception, every carefully hidden secret, was now on the verge of discovery. Time seemed to stretch, each second elongated by the suspense. I watched as the mother-in-law's composure, the very image of elegance and control she had cultivated for decades, began to crumble. Her shoulders slumped slightly, her lips parted in an almost imperceptible gasp, and for the first time, I saw fear and vulnerability intersect in her eyes. The envelope, the whispers, the secret exchanges, all of it had led to this exact moment, and the final confrontation was no longer hypothetical, it was unfolding in real time. And then, as the first guests began to glance toward the subtle tension, whispers rippled through the crowd. My husband, finally noticing the charged energy, looked toward us, confusion and concern etching his features. The mother-in-law's eyes widened in panic as she realized that the entire family was now on the brink of witnessing the truth she had hidden for so long. The confrontation, planned, deliberate, and precise, was no longer just a threat, it had become a reality. The betrayal, the lies, the hidden affair, and the stolen money were poised to be revealed in front of everyone, and nothing could stop it now. In that moment, I felt the culmination of weeks of observation, months of suspicion, and years of subtle inconsistencies. The final confrontation had arrived, and the truth would finally break through the carefully constructed veil of deceit. My mother-in-law, the neighbor, and the hidden secrets, everything was exposed to the tension-filled air of the anniversary party. The backyard, once a scene of celebration, had transformed into a stage for revelation, justice, and the ultimate reckoning. The moment had passed, yet its echoes lingered in the backyard like a storm refusing to dissipate. My mother-in-law's face was a mask of disbelief, shock, and finally, bitter resignation. The envelope, once a small, hidden symbol of deceit, lay on the table in plain view, its presence undeniable to anyone who dared look. Guests had gone from casual chatter to stunned silence in mere seconds. Forks paused mid-air, conversations halted abruptly, and the laughter that had filled the evening evaporated into a tense, suffocating quiet. It was as if the backyard itself had taken a deep breath, holding it in awe of the unfolding reality. My husband's face shifted through confusion, betrayal, and finally horror. He had been unaware of the secret that had lurked behind his mother's smiles and carefully measured gestures for decades. His hands shook slightly as he glanced between his mother and me, trying to reconcile the image of the woman he had known all his life with the one who had so meticulously hidden such profound deception. I can't believe this," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. His eyes, once filled with trust, now scanned every face at the party, searching for confirmation, searching for understanding. The betrayal wasn't just a story, it was tangible, unfolding in front of him, undeniable and painful. The reactions of other family members were just as dramatic. My son, standing close to me, looked wide-eyed at the mother-in-law, his small frame trembling slightly as he whispered, "Mom, is it really true?" I nodded subtly, holding his hand tightly, both as reassurance and to anchor myself amidst the storm. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and friends, all who had been part of this carefully orchestrated celebration, now grappled with disbelief. Some gasped audibly, others exchanged shocked glances, whispering to each other in hurried tones. The betrayal, long hidden behind smiles, polite conversation, and well-rehearsed gestures, had been exposed in a way that left no room for denial, manipulation, or evasion. I observed my mother-in-law closely, noting every subtle shift in her posture, every quiver of her lips, every twitch of her fingers as the reality of her exposure sank in. Her eyes darted nervously across the faces of family members, attempting silently to gauge the extent of the damage and to find a lifeline to salvage her dignity. But the careful construction of her facade, the control she had wielded for so many years, had crumbled entirely. The envelope, a tangible piece of evidence, held the key to everything, and with it laid bare the betrayal, the hidden financial dealings, and the secret relationship that had so carefully been concealed. The neighbor, standing slightly behind her, also displayed a reaction of stark panic. His calculated composure from earlier moments had vanished, replaced by the awareness that his complicity was now public. His face drained of color as he realized the envelope's presence and the inevitability of the truth reaching the family. Any attempt to explain or justify the situation now seemed futile. The revelation had occurred at the perfect moment, catching everyone in a web of undeniable evidence and emotional impact. He shifted awkwardly, his eyes flicking nervously between my mother-in-law and the gathering of witnesses, each glance a silent admission of guilt and fear. The dynamics among family members shifted dramatically. My husband, grappling with the betrayal of his mother, reached for my hand, seeking grounding in the chaos that had erupted. The son of my mother-in-law's longtime friend whispered something inaudible to his mother, and I could see the ripple effect of disbelief spreading through the guests. Confrontations began to simmer quietly, murmurs turned into pointed questions. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" one relative asked, voice trembling. Another muttered, "All this time we trusted her." The words hung in the air, charged with a mixture of outrage, disappointment, and sorrow. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was real, tangible and inescapable. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law's attempts to regain composure were increasingly desperate. She straightened her posture, forced a smile, and attempted to explain, though her words came out haltingly, devoid of conviction. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain," she murmured, but no one moved closer. No one offered the comfort she had long relied upon to maintain her control. The carefully constructed narrative of her life, once untouchable, had shattered into fragments too small to piece together convincingly. Her previous manipulations, the whispered promises, the secretive gestures, all now stood exposed, and the weight of the family's collective judgment bore down heavily upon her. I felt a mixture of satisfaction, relief, and sorrow. The satisfaction stemmed from the undeniable revelation of truth, the exposure of deceit that had long manipulated our family's perception of reality. Relief came from knowing that the truth was finally out, that no further secrets could be hidden behind carefully measured smiles or whispered assurances. But there was sorrow, too, the sorrow of witnessing the collapse of relationships, the shock and heartbreak in my husband's eyes, and the palpable sense of betrayal that hung over the family like a storm cloud. The mother-in-law's actions had consequences far beyond her own discomfort. They had rippled outward, touching every member of the family in a deeply personal, painful way. Guests began to process the revelation differently. Some confronted my mother-in-law directly, asking pointed questions about the affair, the envelope, and the financial deception. Others took a step back, whispering among themselves, their faces etched with a mix of empathy, outrage, and confusion. The atmosphere, once light and celebratory, now carried the weight of collective judgment. Each person reacted according to their personality, their history with my mother-in-law, and their understanding of the betrayal. For some, the exposure was a relief. Finally, the truth behind years of subtle unease was revealed. For others, it was a shock so profound that it left them momentarily paralyzed, grappling with disbelief and the sudden collapse of long-held assumptions. I noticed my son absorbing the reactions around him. His young mind struggled to reconcile the loving grandmother he had known with the woman now revealed as deceitful and manipulative. I knelt beside him, speaking softly, helping him navigate the storm of emotions, and preparing him for the reality that even those we love most can make choices that hurt profoundly. The juxtaposition of innocence and betrayal heightened the emotional intensity of the moment, making the revelation even more impactful for everyone present. Meanwhile, my husband confronted his mother directly, his voice steady yet filled with controlled anger. "How could you hide this from me? From all of us?" he asked, his eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and incredulity. The words struck her harder than any accusation I could have made, the personal betrayal cutting deeper than the exposure itself. The confrontation forced my mother-in-law to face not only the truth, but also the consequences of her actions in real time, the disintegration of trust, the judgment of family, and the undeniable impact of her deception. The neighbor, finally cornered, attempted weak explanations, but his presence only highlighted the complicity and depth of the betrayal. Every detail, every hidden movement, every subtle action had led to this moment, and nothing could erase the truth now revealed. The envelope, the whispers, the secret exchanges, all had converged into an unavoidable reckoning that left no room for denial. My mother-in-law's carefully maintained image of perfection and control had crumbled completely, replaced by the stark reality of her choices. As the evening drew on, the consequences began to manifest more broadly. Conversations shifted from small talk to discussions about trust, betrayal, and the impact of long-hidden secrets. Family members reevaluated relationships, reassessing past interactions in light of the revelation. The air, once festive and warm, now carried a lingering tension, a reminder that actions have consequences and that deceit, no matter how carefully concealed, will eventually surface. For my husband and son, for me, and for the extended family, the night marked a turning point, a moment when the past collided with the present, exposing truths that could no longer be ignored, and forcing everyone to confront the reality of choices, loyalty, and trust. The backyard, once vibrant with laughter, music, and celebration, had transformed into a quiet space filled with the weight of truth and reflection. The string lights, which had danced across the evening sky in warm, golden arcs, now seemed to shimmer softly over a landscape marked by emotional turmoil and revelations that would forever change our family. Guests had begun to disperse, some lingering in hushed conversations while others quietly excused themselves, unable to process the betrayal and exposure that had unfolded before their eyes. I remained seated on the edge of the patio, my hands resting lightly on my lap, absorbing the silence and the lingering energy of the confrontation. My son, still wide-eyed and a little overwhelmed, clung to my side, and I could feel the weight of the night pressing upon both of us. The lessons of this evening were already settling in, quiet but powerful, like shadows cast by the last light of day. In the aftermath of the revelation, I reflected deeply on the events that had led to this moment. The mother-in-law, whose smile and charm had masked deception for so long, was no longer able to hide behind pretense. The neighbor, whose quiet complicity had supported the affair, now stood revealed to all, a reminder that secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, always leave traces that can be discovered. As I watched her retreat to a corner of the backyard, shoulders slumped in a mixture of shame and defeat, I realized that exposure of deceit does not only bring pain, it also brings clarity, justice, and the opportunity for growth. The family, though shaken, now had a chance to rebuild on a foundation of honesty, to recognize the importance of transparency, trust, and communication in every relationship. My husband, sitting quietly nearby, was immersed in thought. His initial shock and anger had softened into contemplative sorrow, a processing of the betrayal he had unknowingly endured for decades. I reached for his hand, offering reassurance, and noticed the tension in his shoulders gradually easing. "We'll get through this," I whispered, more to myself than to him, acknowledging the uncertain road ahead. It was clear that while some relationships had been fractured beyond repair, others could be healed with time, understanding, and reflection. The night had forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths, to see the cracks in familiar facades, and to acknowledge that deception, once revealed, leaves both the deceiver and the deceived forever changed. The children, though shielded from much of the adult intricacies, were learning a subtle but vital lesson about trust, honesty, and the consequences of actions. My son, still processing the tension of the evening, asked quiet questions about the mother-in-law and the neighbor. I answered carefully, mindful not to overwhelm him with adult complexities, but still honest enough to convey the importance of integrity and moral courage. "Sometimes people we love make mistakes," I said softly, "but it's the truth and honesty that help us heal and grow." His small nod, tentative but thoughtful, reminded me that even in the midst of pain and betrayal, lessons could be absorbed, guiding the next generation toward wisdom and discernment. In those quiet moments, I thought about the nature of revenge and justice. The confrontation, while fueled by the desire for truth and fairness, had also served as a silent lesson in measured action. The careful planning, observation, and timing were not merely acts of retribution. They were a demonstration of discernment, patience, and courage. The mother-in-law's exposure had not been hasty or spiteful. It had been precise, deliberate, and above all fair. This distinction was crucial, as it highlighted the difference between destructive revenge and rightful justice, showing that standing up against deceit can be empowering without being cruel. As the night wore on, the family began to process the broader implications of the exposure. Conversations shifted from blame to reflection, from accusation to understanding, and from anger to contemplation of personal responsibility. We spoke quietly about boundaries, respect, and the importance of transparent communication in maintaining trust within a family. It became clear that the events of the evening, though painful, offered an unprecedented opportunity for growth, learning, and the cultivation of stronger, healthier relationships in the future. The mother-in-law, while facing the consequences of her actions, also faced a chance for self-reflection, a moment to consider her choices, and perhaps a path toward genuine remorse and change. I observed the subtle interactions between family members, the reassessment of relationships, the tentative steps toward reconciliation, and the cautious but sincere attempts to re-establish trust. There was no immediate resolution, no instant forgiveness, yet the groundwork for healing had been laid. The events of the party had exposed not only deception but also the underlying strengths of the family, the capacity for resilience, the power of truth, and the enduring bonds that, while tested, could ultimately withstand adversity. Every glance, every gesture, every quiet conversation in the aftermath carried weight, signaling the slow but steady movement from chaos toward clarity. In reflecting on my own emotions, I recognized a complex blend of satisfaction, sadness, and hope. Satisfaction came from knowing the truth had finally been revealed, that deceit could no longer manipulate or control the narrative of our family. Sadness stemmed from witnessing the pain inflicted on those we loved, the disillusionment of discovering that a trusted family member had acted in secrecy for personal gain. Hope emerged as I considered the lessons we had all learned, the importance of vigilance, the value of honesty, and the possibility of growth and reconciliation even after profound betrayal. These lessons, though forged in the heat of dramatic confrontation, were enduring, shaping the perspectives of every family member present that evening. As I looked around the dimly lit backyard, the finality of the night settled over me like a quiet veil. The music had ended, glasses were cleared, and the guests who remained were speaking in hushed tones, carefully navigating the fragile dynamics that had been irrevocably altered. The mother-in-law sat quietly, her face a mixture of shame and contemplation, while my husband and I exchanged subtle glances, acknowledging that this night would be remembered not for the celebration it was meant to be, but for the undeniable revelation, the justice served, and the profound lessons learned. The family, though shaken, had endured. Truth had triumphed, and in that endurance, there was both healing and hope. Finally, I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the night settle in my chest. I understood that life would never be the same. Trust would have to be rebuilt carefully, relationships reassessed, and boundaries reinforced. But amidst the pain, the heartbreak, and the lingering tension, there was clarity. We had confronted deceit, witnessed the consequences, and embraced the lessons inherent in exposure, honesty, and moral courage. The mother-in-law, the neighbor, and the secrets had all played their part in shaping a night that would forever remain etched in our memories, a night of revelation, reflection, and enduring lessons about the delicate balance between trust, deception, and redemption. As we finally gathered our things to leave, I felt a quiet sense of resolve. Life had offered a harsh lesson, but it had also granted insight, resilience, and the chance to rebuild with wisdom. In the aftermath, I knew that the family, though forever marked by the events of the anniversary party, would emerge stronger, more vigilant, and more deeply connected by the shared experience of truth, consequence, and reflection. The anniversary party had ended, yet the echoes of the night lingered like shadows that refused to leave. Guests had departed, leaving the backyard quiet except for the faint hum of the streetlights and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I stood at the edge of the patio, surveying the scene of chaos and revelation that had unfolded mere hours before. Chairs were still slightly askew. Decorations bore subtle marks from hurried gestures and tense confrontations, and the faint aroma of half-eaten desserts lingered in the cool night air. Everything seemed frozen in time, a lingering reminder of the truths exposed and the bonds irrevocably altered. Despite the outward calm, the tension inside me was palpable. I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, the mix of satisfaction, relief, and uncertainty that followed the dramatic exposure of my mother-in-law's affair. The envelope, the whispers, and the hidden relationship had been revealed, but questions lingered, questions that refused to settle. The night had provided clarity in some areas, yet opened entirely new doors of uncertainty. Who else had known? How far did the betrayal extend? And most importantly, what would my mother-in-law do next? The mere thought made my stomach tighten, a reminder that even after justice seemed served, the consequences of hidden secrets often continue to unfold in unpredictable ways. I glanced toward my husband, who was still processing the whirlwind of emotions that had shaken him to his core. His hands, now steadier but still tense, clutched the small remnants of his composure, while his eyes remained fixed on the corner where his mother had retreated. He had experienced a range of emotions, from shock and betrayal to anger and protective instinct, but even now, I could see the flicker of something unresolved in his gaze. The night's revelations had not only changed his perception of his mother, but had also awakened questions about trust, loyalty, and the hidden dynamics that had influenced our family for years. My son, who had witnessed the confrontation more closely than anyone else, was curled up near my side, whispering quiet questions and seeking reassurance. "Mom, is she really going to be okay?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I held him close, understanding both the innocence in his concern and the importance of guiding him through the aftermath of such a traumatic revelation. "We don't know yet," I replied softly, "but what matters is that the truth came out, and now we can face whatever happens next together." The small, tentative nod he offered in response was a quiet reminder that even in the wake of chaos and betrayal, the bonds of family, though tested, could remain resilient. But as the night deepened, a new layer of tension emerged. My mother-in-law, despite the exposure and humiliation she had endured, had retreated into silence, her expression unreadable and her body tense. I knew her well enough to recognize that this quiet was not defeat, it was plotting, a dangerous pause before action. The envelope, now empty but symbolically potent, still held significance. Who she might contact, how she might manipulate the situation further, and what hidden allies or secrets might surface next. All of it loomed in the shadows of the night. The calm exterior of the backyard masked a storm of intentions, a reminder that while we had achieved justice in one moment, the narrative was far from over. Even as I tried to relax, the subtle signs of lingering danger kept me on edge. A faint noise from the side gate, a shadow moving across the house, the distant hum of tires on pavement, all hinted at a world beyond our immediate awareness. It was as though the revelation had not closed the chapter but had instead opened a new, unpredictable storyline. My instincts, honed by weeks of careful observation and preparation, screamed that this was only the beginning of a more complex web. Someone, or something, was still watching, waiting for the right moment to strike, and we would need every ounce of vigilance and courage to navigate what was coming. I could not ignore the thought that the mother-in-law, cunning and resourceful as she was, might have already set plans in motion that would test the family in ways we could not yet imagine. The betrayal had been exposed, yes, but the full scope of her schemes, the potential ripple effects, and the unseen connections that had facilitated her deception were still hidden. Every glance she cast toward the shadows, every subtle shift in posture, suggested a mind already calculating the next move. And though she had been publicly unmasked, the private game, the one she had played for decades, was far from over. The neighbor, too, remained an unresolved variable. His visible panic and awkward movements earlier in the evening had demonstrated complicity, yet the depth of his involvement, the extent of the secrets he had kept, and the potential for retaliation remained unknown. Would he attempt to rewrite the story in his favor? Could he inadvertently trigger new conflicts? The tension was palpable, a living thread connecting all parties, stretching taut across the unseen dynamics that had governed our family's relationships for years. Every subtle movement, every whispered conversation in the coming days, could ignite further revelations, new betrayals, or unexpected alliances. As I stepped toward the patio door to collect the remaining decorations and tidy the space, a sudden flutter of papers caught my eye near the corner of the yard, the envelope's companion, perhaps a forgotten note or an overlooked document. I froze, heart racing, the past hours rushing back in vivid detail. Could this be another clue? Another piece of the puzzle that had not yet surfaced? My instincts screamed that the night's story was not finished, that the envelope had been only the first act, and that the real drama, the one that would continue to challenge trust, loyalty, and courage, was just beginning to unfold. The lingering silence of the backyard, the soft rustle of leaves, and the faint echoes of departing guests created a surreal atmosphere. It felt as though the world itself had paused to allow the weight of secrets, revelations, and consequences to settle. And yet, beneath this calm surface, an undercurrent of tension remained, a reminder that even when the truth is revealed, the story continues, its threads weaving into the future in ways that are unpredictable, thrilling, and potentially dangerous. I looked one last time toward my mother-in-law, who sat in quiet contemplation, her expression unreadable. A small, almost imperceptible smirk crossed her lips, and I realized that while tonight had been our moment of triumph, hers was far from over. The envelope, the affair, the betrayal, they were pieces of a much larger puzzle that would continue to unfold. And as I held my son close, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath and the warmth of family connection, I understood the final truth of the evening, Justice had been served for now, but the story was far from complete. The next chapter loomed, unknown, filled with the promise of further secrets, unforeseen challenges, and the relentless pull of family drama that could reshape our lives once again. And in that moment, I knew one undeniable fact. The next move was hers, and when it came, it would change everything.